Hi, Phil Plait from badastronomy.com here. Welcome to episode 4 of Q and BA, where I answer your questions about astronomy. Well, before I get to this week's episode, I have to admit I made an error in last week's episode. I said that Mu Cephei, at a distance of between 2 and 5,000 light years, was the most distant star you can see with the naked eye. Well, that's wrong. In fact, the most distant star you can see with the naked eye is Eta Carinae, which is about 7,500 light years away. And, I blew it. I made a mistake, and that happens. But this one's a little more embarrassing than usual because, in fact, I studied Eta Car for a little while using Hubble. So I'm a little embarrassed by this one. But I'm also a little ticked because nobody from the Southern Hemisphere emailed me and told me I'd made a mistake. So look, folks, if you catch me in an error here, email me. If you're right, I'll, may use it on the video. Or I may simply ignore it. We'll see. Well, let's get to this week's episode. Jesse C. from Doylestown, Pennsylvania writes in and asks, does a person standing beside you have a greater gravitational pull on you than the moon? I recently heard someone mention it. It sounds like a bunch of malarkey, but is it true? Well, it turns out no, it's not true, and that surprised me, but here's how this works. The gravitational pull of an object on you depends on two things. It depends on the mass of the object. The more massive it is, the stronger its pull is, and its distance from you. The farther away it is, the weaker its gravitational pull on you will be. So for the moon, we know what that is. We know what the mass and the distance are at least, and so we can calculate that. For a person, well, let's just assume somebody has a mass of 70 kilograms, 155 pounds, so that's probably good. Now for their distance, we have to be careful, because when you're measuring the gravitational pull of one object on another, you have to measure the distance between their centers of mass. So my center of mass is located somewhere down in here below the flying spaghetti monster. Well, I'm about 20 centimeters thick. So we'll assume that my center of mass is halfway inside of me. So we'll call it 10 centimeters from my center of mass to my belly here. And the same thing for the person I'm holding on to. So their 10 centimeters plus my 10 centimeters is 20 centimeters. And we'll use that as a distance. And when you do out all the math and you figure this all out, you find that the moon pulls on you 300 times stronger than someone right up against you. So if you're holding somebody, you're actually kissing them, you're making out with them, the moon is actually a stronger influence on you than they are. So if you're feeling an attraction towards somebody like that, it might be the moon. I know it's not very romantic, but that's science and we're stuck with it. Well, it turns out the sun is actually even a bigger influence because even though it's farther away than the moon, it's a lot more massive. And when you calculate the math for that, you find that the sun pulls on you about 50,000 times stronger than someone you're holding on to. And even that's not the biggest influence because, there's something we're forgetting, isn't there? Look down. It's the Earth, right? You're standing on the surface of a planet. Well, if you put in the mass of the Earth and the distance to the center of the Earth, which is 6,400 kilometers, you find that the Earth is pulling on you about 80 million times stronger than someone right next to you. So that's clearly the biggest influence. Now, when I hear this question asked, usually it's in reference to astrology. The idea being that the planets are somehow gravitationally affecting you when you're born, and that's going to, change your personality or something like that. And the idea is that there's a doctor there, an obstetrician, and their gravity on you is stronger than the planets. Well, if you do the math, you find that at its closest, Jupiter, the biggest planet, and it has more gravity, at least on you, than any of the other planets, has about 3 times the gravitational pull on you than a doctor right up against you. So in fact, Jupiter has a stronger pull, and Venus, when it's at its closest to the Earth, also has a stronger pull, although only about 1.5 times as strong as that person. But if you actually average out all the planets' distances and you do it that way, then it's roughly comparable. Maybe a little bit more than the doctor, but it's roughly comparable. So the doctor should have at least as strong as an influence as any given planet. But that's still not the thing. There are going to be mountains nearby, maybe, or not mountains nearby. And mountains have a larger gravitational influence on you, if they're nearby, than the doctor will, or even the planets. So if you're born in, say, Boulder, Colorado, at the foothill of the Rocky Mountains, which are big mountains, or, say, Kansas, where there are no mountains nearby for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers, that's going to be a much larger influence over your personality, if astrology is correct, right, than the planets are. So clearly, this shows that astrology is ridiculous, and it's only one way astrology is ridiculous. There are lots more. But that's it for this week. If you have a question for me, please email me. It's thebatastronomer@gmail.com. And for badastronomy.com and QNBA, I'm Phil Plait.